Leaving you was my best decision. You couldn't give me a child, but your best friend did.
Then you should open this envelope, because that baby isn't yours, and I was never infertile.
My ex-husband called me useless because I could not give him a child. Then he introduced the baby he had with my best friend. I almost told him the truth right there in the hospital. But the envelope in my hand was about to destroy everything he believed. Hello. My name is Blair Dennett, and 1 year after my divorce, I learned that the cruelest lie in my marriage was not the affair. It was the child. I had gone to St. Matthew's Hospital on a rainy Tuesday morning for what should have been a simple appointment. I was 34 years old, newly promoted, finally sleeping through the night again, and trying to build a life that no longer revolved around my ex-husband's opinion of me. The envelope in my hand contained the results of a medical test I had waited years to take. I had not opened it yet. As I stepped out of the elevator, I heard a laugh I knew too well. It was sharp, confident, and always a little too loud. My body recognized it before my mind did. Daniel. My ex-husband stood near the pediatric wing wearing an expensive navy suit. Beside him was my former best friend Vanessa Cole. She held a small boy dressed in a blue sweater. The child had round cheeks, dark curls, and a tiny silver bracelet around his wrist. For a moment none of us moved. Vanessa looked away first. Daniel did not. He smiled as if the universe had arranged our meeting for his entertainment. "Claire," he said, "still coming to hospitals alone." I tightened my fingers around the envelope. "Good morning, Daniel." He glanced at the name of the women's health clinic printed across the top. Then his smile widened. "Still trying to fix the impossible?" he asked. Vanessa whispered his name, but he ignored her. He placed one hand on the boy's back and looked directly into my eyes. "Leaving you was the best decision I ever made," he said. "A useless woman can't have children. I'm lucky Vanessa gave me a son." The hallway went quiet inside my head. There had been a time when those words would have broken me. I would have gone home, closed the curtains, and wondered what I had done to deserve them. But I was not that woman anymore. I looked at the little boy. He was almost 1 year old. Daniel and I had been divorced for exactly 12 months. That meant Vanessa had been pregnant long before our marriage ended. I already suspected the affair. Now he had confirmed the timeline himself. I smiled. Not because it did not hurt, because Daniel had just made a mistake. He had wanted to humiliate me. Instead, he had handed me the final piece of a puzzle I had been quietly building for a year. "He's beautiful," I said. Vanessa's eyes filled with surprise. Daniel looked disappointed that I had not cried. Then a nurse opened a nearby door and called, "Mrs. Cole. The genetic counselor is ready for you." Vanessa went pale. Daniel turned toward her. "Genetic counselor." She adjusted the child against her chest. "It's routine. You said this was a vaccination appointment." "It is. They just want to discuss something in his blood work." Daniel's smile disappeared. Vanessa hurried through the door without looking back. I should have walked away. Instead, I noticed something that made the hairs rise on my arms. The child's bracelet did not say Bennett, Daniel's last name. It said Cole. Vanessa had never legally changed the baby's name. Daniel followed her, but before he entered the room, he looked back at me. "Enjoy your empty life," he said. Then the door closed. I stood there for several seconds. After that, I found an empty chair by the window, and finally opened my envelope. The letter inside was short. My hands began to shake as I read it twice. There was no evidence that I had ever been infertile. According to the specialist, my hormone levels were normal. My ovarian reserve was healthy. The old test results from my marriage did not match my medical profile. The doctor recommended an investigation because the original laboratory report might have been altered. I stared through the window at the rain. For 4 years, Daniel had blamed me. For 4 years, I had taken pills, endured procedures, changed my diet, canceled vacations, and apologized every month when I was not pregnant. Daniel had refused every test the doctors suggested for him. He said the problem was obviously mine, because the report from our private clinic proved it. That report had arrived through his company email. He had printed it for me. And his college roommate, Dr. Marcus Hale, had owned the clinic. The truth did not strike me like lightning. It arrived slowly, piece by piece, until I could no longer pretend I did not see it. Daniel had known. Or he had helped create the lie. I left the hospital without speaking to him again. In my car, I called the one person I trusted with facts more than feelings. My divorce attorney, Evelyn Shaw. "I need you to reopen my file." I told her. What happened? "I think Daniel falsified my medical report, and I think he used it to manipulate the divorce." There was a pause. "Do not contact him," Evelyn said. "Do not contact the clinic. Send me everything you have." That afternoon, I gave her the new letter, the old report, copies of our divorce documents, and every message Daniel had sent about my supposed infertility. There were hundreds. Some were cruel. You failed again. My mother was right about you. Why should I pay for another useless treatment? Others were more dangerous because they sounded reasonable. Send the house over to me. You need a clean beginning. Give up your share of Bennett Medical Logistics. The stress is bad for your health. Accept the settlement. No one else will take care of you the way I did. During the divorce, I had surrendered my interest in the company we built together. Daniel claimed he deserved it because he would someday have children to support, while I never would. I accepted less than 1/3 of what my shares were worth. At the time, I wanted only to escape. Now I wondered whether my diagnosis had been more than cruelty. Maybe it had been strategy. Evelyn obtained a court order preserving the clinic's records before anyone could delete them. The first discovery arrived 2 weeks later. My original blood sample had never been tested for infertility. The patient number on my report belonged to another woman. The signature at the bottom was copied from a different document, and the clinic's electronic records showed that Marcus had opened my file late one night using an administrator account. But there was more. 3 days before the fake report was created, Daniel had transferred $25,000 to a consulting company owned by Marcus's wife. When Evelyn showed me the bank record, I felt sick. Can we prove what the money was for? I asked. Not yet, she said. But we can prove Daniel lied during the divorce. That may be enough to reopen the financial settlement. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to ask how he could watch me cry on the bathroom floor, while knowing the report was false. But Evelyn reminded me that Daniel survived by controlling the room. The best way to defeat him was to let him believe he still controlled it. So I waited. Meanwhile, another mystery grew. Vanessa called me 3 times. I did not answer. Then she sent a message. Claire, I need to tell you something about Noah. Daniel must not know yet. Noah was the baby. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. We met the next morning at a crowded coffee shop. I chose a public place and told Evelyn where I would be. Vanessa arrived without makeup, wearing a baseball cap and a gray coat. She looked nothing like the polished woman from the hospital. Thank you for coming, she said. You have 10 minutes. She flinched, but I felt no guilt. Vanessa had been my closest friend since college. She had stood beside me at my wedding. She had held my hand after every failed pregnancy test. And all that time, she had been sleeping with my husband. Noah's sick, she said. My anger paused. How sick? The doctors found a rare inherited blood disorder. It can be treated, but they need accurate family history and genetic testing from both parents. Then Daniel should take the test. She looked down. He did? I already knew what she would say before she said it. Daniel is not Noah's biological father. The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. Does Daniel know? Who is the father? Vanessa's voice dropped to a whisper. Marcus Hale, the clinic owner, Daniel's friend, the man who had falsified my medical report. For one strange second, I almost laughed. The whole ugly story had folded back on itself. Vanessa wiped her eyes. She told me that her affair with Daniel had begun 6 months before my divorce. But before Daniel, there had been Marcus. It had lasted only a few weeks. When she discovered she was pregnant, she did not know which man was the father. Daniel was wealthier. He wanted a child. And Vanessa wanted the life he could provide. So she chose the answer that benefited her. You let him believe Noah was his, I said. I thought he was. No, you hoped he was? She lowered her head. Then she told me something even worse. Marcus had agreed to change my report because Daniel wanted a reason to leave me without appearing unfaithful. But Marcus had another reason to cooperate. He believed that if Daniel married Vanessa and claimed the baby, no one would ever ask questions about him. 3 people had built their future on one lie. Now a sick little boy was paying for it. Why come to me? I asked. Because Marcus refuses to submit an official sample. He says it would ruin his career and marriage. Daniel thinks the first test was wrong. He wants another one at Marcus's clinic. Of course he did. And what do you expect me to do? You have evidence against Marcus. Make him cooperate. I sat back and looked at the woman who had watched Daniel destroy me, then helped him celebrate. Part of me wanted to walk away. But Noah had not betrayed me. He was an innocent child surrounded by adults who treated truth like a tool. I will help the boy, I said. I will not protect you. Vanessa began to cry. That is the only offer you are getting. Evelyn contacted the hospital through the proper legal channels. Within 48 hours, Marcus received notice that the evidence of falsified records would be referred to the medical board and prosecutors. He was also ordered to preserve his DNA and all communications involving Daniel and Vanessa. Marcus surrendered a sample the next day. The test confirmed he was Noah's biological father. The doctors finally had the information they needed. Marcus turned out to be a compatible donor for a treatment that could stabilize Noah's condition. He cooperated. Not because he suddenly became a good man, but because a judge gave him no comfortable alternative. Noah began treatment. Then it was Daniel's turn to learn the truth. It happened at a mediation session Evelyn arranged for my reopened divorce case. Daniel entered the conference room with 2 attorneys and the same arrogant smile he had worn at the hospital. "Claire," he said, taking the seat across from me. "Still trying to make money from your personal failures." I said nothing. Evelyn placed 3 folders on the table. The first contained proof that my medical report had been falsified. The second contained the payment from Daniel to Marcus's family company. The third contained messages recovered from Marcus's phone. One message from Daniel read, "Make the report final. If Claire believes she is the problem, she'll give me the company without a fight." Another said, "Once the divorce is done, Vanessa and the baby can move in. Everyone will think I left because Claire couldn't give me a family." Daniel stopped smiling. His lead attorney asked for a private break. Evelyn refused until we finished presenting our settlement demand. We wanted my full ownership share restored at its current value, repayment of the income I had lost, my legal fees, and damages for fraud. Daniel leaned toward me. "You think you can steal my company?" "Our company," I said. "The one I helped build before you used a fake diagnosis to push me out." He looked around the room as if someone might rescue him. No one did. Then the conference room door opened. Vanessa walked in with her attorney. Daniel's face softened for half a second. "Tell them this is nonsense." Vanessa did not sit beside him. She placed a certified genetic report on the table. "Noah is not your son," she said. Daniel stared at her. At first, I thought he had not heard. Then his face turned red. "What did you say?" "Marcus is his biological father." The silence that followed was heavier than shouting. Daniel looked at the report, then at me. I watched him understand everything at once. The friend he had paid to destroy my life had slept with the woman he chose over me. The child he used to humiliate me was not his. And the woman he called useless had never been infertile. He stood so quickly that his chair fell backward. "This is your revenge," he said to me. "You planned this." "No, Daniel. I did not create any of this." I slid his own messages across the table. "I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences." His attorneys pulled him into the hallway before he could say anything worse. The case did not end that day. Real justice rarely arrives in one dramatic moment. It came through months of depositions, audits, hearings, and signed orders. Marcus lost his clinic and his medical license. He accepted a plea agreement for falsifying records and obstructing the investigation. He was required to contribute to Noah's medical care. Vanessa faced a civil claim from Daniel and lost the expensive home he had purchased in both their names. She moved closer to the children's hospital and focused on Noah's treatment. I never became her friend again, but I kept my promise not to punish the child for her choices. Daniel's board removed him as chief executive after the fraud became public. An audit found that he had also used company money to pay Marcus and to cover personal expenses during the affair. The court restored my ownership interest and awarded me damages. 6 months later, the board asked me to return, not as Daniel's assistant, the role he had once forced me into, but as chief executive officer. I accepted. On my first day, I removed his enormous portrait from the lobby. I replaced it with a framed photograph of the company's original warehouse, where I had packed boxes beside him before success convinced him that he had built everything alone. Under the photograph, I placed one sentence: "Integrity is what remains when ambition loses its audience." Noah's treatment worked. Vanessa sent me one photograph of him standing beside a hospital bed, smiling with 2 missing front teeth. I saved it, not because I forgave her, but because it reminded me that justice and cruelty are not the same thing. And me, I eventually stopped measuring my life by whether I became a mother. The new specialist told me that pregnancy was possible, but for the first time, the choice belonged to me. I did not need a child to prove I was complete. I did not need a husband to confirm I was lovable. And I did not need Daniel's regret to validate my healing. 2 years after that morning in the hospital, I returned to St. Matthew's for a charity meeting. As I stepped out of the elevator, I remembered the woman I had been, the one clutching an unopened envelope while her ex-husband called her useless. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her what I knew now. She was never useless. She was surrounded by people who needed her to believe she was small, because the truth about her strength frightened them. Daniel once said leaving me was the best decision he ever made. In the end, he was right. Because when he left, he took the lies with him and gave me back the woman I had almost forgotten how to be.